Hello everyone, welcome to our HRIR group. A warm welcome on a Saturday evening. Glad to see so many people devoting time to learning. On behalf of core HRIR core team, which comprises of Kriti Rawat, Anu Agarwal, Jyoti Sharma, Kashish Verma, Kumar Bhanu Pratap Singh, Veer, and myself, I formally welcome you all to this session of learning and sharing. Um, we feel honored to host this seminar on building a culture of trust and collaboration. HR professionals from various companies have joined us today in this learning journey. So welcome to all of you. For the benefits of professionals who have joined us for the first time, I would like to give a brief intro about the group. So as you can all see, Core HRIR was formed in Jan 2017 with a vision to become globally acclaimed platform for HR sharing knowledge and insights, building learning blocks, knowledge boards, and brainstorm, comprehend and develop universal industry best practices across all facets of HR. So there are 1,200 plus HR leaders, CHROs, leading HR minds from Fortune 500 companies who are part of the core HR and IR group now. And since its inception, we have initiatives focused on sharing futuristic HR strategies, discussion threads, latest HR news, advances, etc. One is, of course, towards growth, which says to be an internationally renowned group focused on sharing futuristic HR strategies, advances, and professional platform to share. So our initiatives to support our vision are WhatsApp group. First initiative to share latest updates, best practices, seek solution to various HR issues. It's a live bio basically, which active with multiple discussions all the time. Learning Weekend is our webinar series where HR stalwarts from various domains share their insights with us. We collaborate with the thought leaders and create a medium to enable learning from their rich experience. Job board is where the global career opportunities are listed for HR professionals. Sharing HR awards was formed to create an opportunity for young HR achievers and enable them to showcase their contribution and achievement among HR fraternity. We also have a program, Chai Buddy, which is our group's very own version of an HR conclave, where HR leaders and professionals get together to brainstorm and share their experiences and expertise with the HR fraternity. This is a great opportunity for all to connect, build their professional network. So do look out for the next uh, sessions being conducted. To speak about the speaker, this is Ms. Harini Srinivasan. She's a seasoned HR leader with global exposure across geographies like India, Middle East, the GCC countries, Europe, and APAC countries. She's a certified design thinking professional and behavior analyst. She's completed over 3,500 plus hours of mentoring, over 250 hours of leadership coaching. She's designed and ran assessment centers for mid-level to senior leaders in the engineering industry. She comes with exposure in strategic experience in transformational HR leadership, resourcing strategy and management, best organizational practices, organizational restructuring in M&A, and change management in MNCs with employee strength of 10,000 plus. Panelist and speaker at HR forums, universities, and B schools. Industries she's worked for is pharmaceutical, ITITS, manufacturing, engineering and power, oil and gas, consulting. project management consulting basically. She's an affiliate partner for People in Culture at Simcoe Style Institute India LLP and Chief Mentor HR in TeleSwift. Bit of brief about me. I'm the host today. I'm Asthananda. I come with 8 years of experience in talent management, and I'm currently associated with JBM Group as Group Corporate HR. So the series 18 of Core HR IR Learning Weekend is dedicated towards building a culture of trust and collaboration, which, as I mentioned, will be delivered to you by Ms. Harini Srinivasan. So let's move on to building a culture of trust and collaboration. Welcome, ma'am.
Thanks, Astha. Right. So, shall we get started, Astha?
Yes, thank you. That will be great, ma'am.
Okay. So fantastic. So, a very good evening, good day to all of you who are present here. It's fantastic to spend an hour with the fraternity. So, let me begin with what we're actually going to talk about. Astha, can we ensure everyone else is on mute? I'm getting a lot of background noise.
Is it?
Yeah.
I would request all of you to please keep your systems on mute, please. Ma'am, I think we can go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So, shall we bring up the PPT first, Astha?
Sure, ma'am. I'll do that.
Yeah.
So the PPT says
Okay, so while the PPT is up, I think I can still continue with what I have to say. That will be the first slide that I. Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just go on. So the PPT, yeah. So let's the PPT has very little content in any case. So as long as I am audible, it should be good enough, right? So yeah. So the first thing I would like to start with is a little story, and the story is actually about a curious child and the coffee jar. As I go through the next 30 minutes or so, all that you will hear will be stories from real life case studies. Because I went through some of the questions that people had asked, and I felt it is most relevant if we go through as many real life case studies as possible, right? So all of this are instances from experiences that I've had in the various industries that I have worked, and also from what I have seen and heard and accumulated over my experience over the years. Right? So the first story is, uh, it's about a curious child and the coffee jar. So this is something that happened at home, really. So, my son, when he was about 4 years old, he saw me getting home a large jar of coffee. And a curious child that he was, he went to grab it and it crashed and broke, right? So what happened actually? Typically, a reaction would have been actually scolding the child or giving the child a whack, and that's typically how a manager would also behave at the workplace when something goes wrong, right? So, somewhere good sense prevailed on me, and I took the child the confidence, and then we decided to do something about the damage and what we can do to control it. So we scooped up the coffee, we made a solution out of it, we let it sediment, we decanted it, filtered it, and all of that. And the reaction of the child was that he noticed that it was not wrong to be curious. So this is the first fundamental level of how trust gets built in any relationship. So if you look at the next slide, which is about the three ego states, that's what actually happens in any kind of such a transaction, right? So the moment something goes wrong at the workplace, you have managers who take what is called as a parent ego state automatically, because they are actually in a position of power, and that kind of gives them the authority to do that. And the moment a person takes the position of power, the parent ego state, automatically the other person who's receiving the transaction gets into the child ego state. So what happens is the child ego state individual gets very defensive and starts wearing several masks, layers of masks, and is only there to defend his actions. Whereas the person in the parent ego state is out there trying to find out fault. Now, this is where trust starts breaking down. So, the next time there is a situation in life where the person could have felt that he would have made a mistake, obviously he's going to start wearing those masks much earlier. Just like in the story of the curious child and the coffee jar, had a layer of trust not been built, that it's okay to experiment, it's okay to try something new, it's perfectly okay to make a mistake, I think that's where trust starts breaking down. So if I were to take this situation, if I were to look at the situation a little more with analysis, uh, this is about getting people into the adult ego state. So consciously, what managers need to do is, in a situation of a crisis, keep coming into pushing themselves down from a parent ego state to an adult ego state, and which automatically brings every single recipient also who's in the child ego state upwards into the adult ego state. So when adult ego states conversations happen, typically the result is a constructive and a productive solution. So, as Ricardo Semler quotes in one of his books, it's a very prominent statement, and that really struck me is, all of us are mature individuals, right? We all say we are grown up, and that's how we are at home. But why is it then that when we come to the workplace, we suddenly start treating each other as adolescents and start giving instructions as to this is how it's to be done and this is not how it's to be done, and so on and so forth? So probably the foremost thing to start building trust is to start treating adults as adults. Okay. So let's go into a scenario. Now this will be probably the second story, where we are talking about transparency and authentic transparency. Right. So the second story is something where, I would actually take a scene from one of the organizations which I have been associated with very closely. I obviously wouldn't want to name the organization, but in terms of authentic transparency, I think what it really means is being very open, transparent, and very true about whatever you're communicating down to the people. So there was this situation. The organization was going through series of transformations back to back. Obviously, there is a lot of dynamics that happens in the marketplace as well, which is also impacting the organization as an external force. So the transformations which are happening inside, there is a change of management, there is a change of leadership, so on and so forth. That's the internal turbulence that's happening. And the external market conditions are the external turbulence. So just imagine what's happening with the people there. So in this situation, one of the initiatives that we had to drive was we had to do a kind of an organizational restructuring, not more than a restructuring, it was more like giving people new job titles, designations, and so on and so forth. So this was a massive, humongous exercise with thousands of people getting impacted. And obviously, the results were expected to be that of severe backlash, and people were expecting that there would be attrition, people would be unhappy with what's happening with them, so on and so forth, because and everybody is resistant about change. So there is a lot of skepticism, apprehensions about what would happen when job titles change. Okay. So the approach we took is we said that let's go ahead, with dealing with adults as adults. Let's go and face it. The best way is to go and face it. And that's what is authentic transparency all about. So what we decided to do is, actually we said that, let's go ahead and do as much communication as possible in the right way. Of course, not repetitive communication, but because that would mean over communication. So what we decided we would do is we would have a lot of those open houses where the entire leadership would stand as one and communicate why this was done, how it was done, most importantly, and how it is going to impact every single individual. Now, this itself was a challenge to convince everybody in the management. It was a large organization, so obviously. So the stand we took is that it's very, very important for leaders to communicate, because that's where trust starts get building. And this is one of the first stages where this kind of transformation was happening. And it was very, very important that the foundation of trust was to be strong. So we said, let's start doing communication. Let's start calling people in small groups of, let's say, 30 people. And then we said that HR will always be there to front end these communications, because we are there. We are the ones who have actually done a lot of the work in the background. And of course, I need the entire line management there, because when there are very specific questions asked, no one could be better than them. So the leadership team actually decided to stand as a group, as one family, and we focused on the following points. First thing is, we said, let's all recognize the power of being direct. So our communication was very, very direct. And we said, this is what was the need for the change. Okay? And this is why we did it. And this was the process that we followed. And we took out very simple examples and we gave it out to them. And we said, now it's your turn. So please start with your questions. So we gave them an opportunity to overcome their fears and start talking. Now, how we did that is, this was done as in a pretty informal manner, in the sense we did not have a huge town hall where it becomes, it's like a janta announcement. We did not do that. What we did was, we said, let's call in batches of 30, and we did it in a conference room. And so we said that, let's not feel tired of doing batch after batch and batch after batch, and let's do this, because it's important that a small batch size lets people know that every one of them is being given an opportunity to speak. Right? So in our opening statements, we said we are intentionally calling you in small batches, because we want to hear what each one of you may have as concerns as an outcome of this exercise. So what happened in the process is that every single person felt that this was a platform for them to ask their questions. And we also had the entire top management being present. So each and every individual, down to the junior most person, also had this feeling that this is a very refined process, and they overcame their fear and they spoke about whatever apprehensions they had. In fact, we encourage them to come up with any kind of questions without being judgmental as to whether the question is meaningful or not. Because for us, any question that comes from them is a meaningful question. So when we reiterated all of this, it became very, very open and transparent as communication. So one of the things that people asked in that was something where we had to actually give a very bold and a very concrete answer. Obviously, when you're talking about, I think one of the questions was, what is authentic transparency? Now, authentic transparency is when you give a response to a question. I would say everything starting from how your body language is, how you're looking at a person in the eye, and what is the kind of commitment you're making, and what are the indications how you're going to follow through with actions. That's most important when it comes to authentic transparency, right? So one of the questions that did come up was that, okay, you have changed our titles. So what happens to our salaries and salary increases? So obviously
That
this is
comes
a
naturally.
question which, yeah, so this is a question which kind of, and the thing is, it didn't upset us. So we said, yes, I'm sure this is a concern because this impacts every individual. So instead of giving them an answer as to we shall communicate, we told them very clearly that our organization has been following a principle of comparing ourselves with the best in the industry. Right? Of course, affordability is a pointer, and whatever increase is there for the budget, that will be based on what the organization can afford. Nevertheless, we have adopted a process of doing increased benchmarking surveys, and every single individual will have an opportunity to come and discuss how a decision on their salary increase was taken. So when this kind of question came from me representing HR and the rest of the management, including their line managers, obviously a layer of trust was built with respect to this process, because every single individual definitely started feeling that they can ask direct questions and they will get direct answers. I was talking about putting ahead.
Communication is the key, actually, ma'am.
Yeah,
I said
Priyanka?
communication, open communication, and direct communication definitely plays a vital role here.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And not just that, because the matter doesn't end with those town halls or conference room discussions. People are expecting to see an action plan. So we had to put together and tell them that there is an action plan, okay, and this is going to be placed in a common folder where everybody can access, and you're going to see the updated progress on it. And you have every right to question if things are not moving. So all that it required was to be very transparent about the process and about the progress as well. And the moment you're transparent about it, all that you have done is achieved the state of authentic transparency, right? So these were the first 2 points which I really wanted to take this group through before we proceed further. Now, another aspect is the third story which I want to say is in another organization. That's also an organization where I have been very closely associated. This third story is the story of we. And the story of we is actually something which is a very interesting story that happened. And it was all about, how we got everyone from a hierarchical structure to start behaving like a team. So this was an organization which had a legacy of a large Indian conglomerate, which had a history of being, hierarchy driven by virtue of its sheer size and the number of years that it has been in existence. So obviously, when you're looking at a startup, startups are pretty flat, and hierarchy doesn't set in very early. And even if it's not intended, what actually happens is as an organization start growing and as organizations start becoming rigid, what normally happens is hierarchy starts setting in. Because by nature, human basically, there are situations where they don't want to take a risk and want to get into a comfort zone. So that's when they said, people start feeling that, let me have somebody who will take decisions. And that's how hierarchy starts building in. Pretty automatic. Just like how unions get formed automatically, hierarchy probably also starts getting built in automatically. Obviously, when someone takes the child ego state, someone takes a parent ego state, and so on and so forth. So when that happened, and we had to do this, we had to show the story of we had to show the power of being together. And in that organization, obviously, it was not possible to do away with a rigid power structure. It's just not possible. It's a large organization with already a very robust power structure. You can't break hierarchy in a knee-jerk manner. It doesn't work. You can't do a big bang approach every time with an organization of that size. So we said that, actually, what are we saying? Are we saying we need to break the power structures? Not really. We can't do away with the power structures. All that we need to do is to change them, right? So when you change them, what happens is, we are actually looking at a pyramidal power structure. A pyramidal power structure is something where things cascade like a waterfall. Now, you must have heard of Agile. Agile is pretty popular. It started off with a lot of popularity in the IT sector, but it's a philosophy, it's a concept, and I think it can be applied anywhere and everywhere. So when you have a pyramidal structure, you have information flowing top down, and it goes in a very sequential manner. And by the time it really flows down, some messages could have even be altered. Things that we actually articulated there is we use a typical Sempo style principle where we moved the organization structure from being pyramidal to circle, right? So although the organization structure existed, we said that let information not percolate downward. Okay? Let's start demonstrating the story of we. So we said, let's start creating smaller groups or task forces which will drive these changes. So we started creating those smaller transformation task forces, which each of this task force was tightly linked to one particular initiative, or in some cases, we even did a pilot of creating a task force for one customer or a client, very specifically. And the task force had people across hierarchies. So every task force actually was like a small organization in itself. Okay. And the moment you started creating these small organizations, the result is magical. People started feeling, everyone started feeling that I'm important and I don't have to wait for information to be cascaded down, right? So when people started feeling like that, accountability automatically came in. Nobody had to tell anyone that you're accountable for success of this. So every small entity within the larger entity started operating on its own like a self-managed team and started demonstrating the power of being together, the power of we. We could actually notice that circles had formed, hierarchy had started to break, and we also noticed that somewhere we had started to scale down power. Some privileges automatically were given up by people. Because in an hierarchy driven organization, there are very, very trivial privileges which people start expecting. For example, being served tea in their offices. Right? That's a privilege. And people start expecting that it comes with, that's how it comes with hierarchy. So when we started breaking that down, a lot of focus was on the project, was on the customer, and all of that, right? So ultimately, what happened is people started behaving like one. Discrimination of hierarchy and levels just disappeared, and all of that happened. And when that happened, the layers disappeared, and what we created was more room and not layers. So this was how a story of we was demonstrated.
Yes, of course.
And now,
Anything that you can add on power distance also here, if I may request?
yes. So that's actually coming up in the fourth story, the Ivory Tower, right? So in the Ivory Tower, what happened is, now this is also from an experience. So in the Ivory Tower, what normally happened when we actually started with all of these exercises is that we said, okay, everything works top down. So let's start using dictatorship to bring about democracy. Right? So it's ironical, right? So we said, okay, things work when it comes from the top. So we'll make it a mandate to make people to start behaving in a more democratic, more self-managed way. So that's what we call as the dictatorship of democracy. So when we started driving that top down, people started saying that, okay, now you have told me, so I will pass it on to the next level, and then it shall cascade down. And we are not going to do any direct conversations with people down on the floor. So this is how power distances emerged. We said, fine. Now, if that's the case, let's go a little deeper. And we require to do a lot of change management there to handle these power distances, because if power distance is not broken, right, that's where collaboration will never happen. So even if there is trust, if power distance is not broken, the feeling of we will not come. So it is particularly important to get those people out of the ivory tower. Okay? So so in that endeavor, what we did is we started having these conversations with every single individual in the management, and we demonstrated to them the power of being self-managed groups. We started telling them how easy it is to leverage on each other's strengths. Now, how we did that is, I think the best way is to lead by example, to show some demonstrations. So the task force, which was actually responsible for the transformation itself, was a diverse group where power distance was broken. The person who was appointed to lead this was not the senior most person in the group. Okay? So we demonstrated to them that this is the person who is going to lead this transformation, and everyone else is working under this person in a way so that things move. And there is no discrimination, there is privileges have been removed, and every individual has the authority and the openness to talk about what should come next, what could be their ideas. And the whole team is working as a group by asking for each other's ideas because they've started opening up and speaking up. So this is what we call when we say, leveraging peer power. By peer, it doesn't mean a hierarchical peer level. By peer, it just means people who are part of that task. Right? So when we started leveraging peer power, when we started using each other's strengths, there was a situation where we had to do a lot of visual communication. It was required. And suddenly the marketing team was absolutely pressurized with a lot of stuff. They had to do a lot of collateral themselves and all that. And then there was this crisis as to how do you expect us to roll out so many visual communications when we're already so busy? Then we said, okay, why don't we try this little experiment of let's try and see how many people out there who could be of help in this. Let's try and figure out whether there's anyone else who could add value here. So we managed, and we said that when we just started, giving this information out in so many ways of communication, there were a bunch of people who said, I think I have this marketing streak in me, so let me give it a shot and I can be of assistance here. And suddenly we found that the marketing department was not restricted to its walls. Its walls had opened and there were other people who were willing to support them. There were people from HR, there were people from finance, there were people from the delivery, whoever. They were all willing to come out there and try their hand on creating those visuals. So where's the power distance gone? It just disappeared. And what actually happened is people started understanding that you get into a particular job and you're stuck there because you must have come because of your qualification and you must have just grown there vertically. But there's always this very strong possibility that you have some skills in you which you would like to explore. But because our systems do not permit us to talk about it cross-functionally, we don't, and we sometimes forget that we have those talents. So in a situation like this, when you're not bound by a system, you're not bound by a hierarchy, you're just bound by that one goal of having to do it. Just do it. Then there's nothing that comes actually in your way. So we figured out that there are ways in which every team starts blending or getting more people into it, just by opening its doors, just by letting people explore and experiment. And of course, when there is a crisis, when something goes really wrong, the experts are there. So nothing stops people from experimenting. So while we were doing this, a very interesting situation actually happened. We were getting a lot of enthusiastic junior folks who said, okay, we'll do this and we'll do that and all of that. And they did a fantastic job. That was the best part. The outcome was amazing. And then by the time we also noticed that the feeling was so strong of being fearless and speaking up openly. Some of them even mentioned in one of those sessions where we used to do a lot of discussions post, we used to actually celebrate every single success. And some of them said, look, we have started exploring other opportunities where our interests are. Why don't you tell our managers also to do that? So that is a level of openness that came. And how did it happen? Purely because of trust. So an organization which started off with a culture of saying that we are up there, we are managers, we know how things are to be done, please train. Can you just repeat that, Asa?
Yes, of course. I said that would have helped the HR team in creating internal market also for the employees. Yeah. Within the organization, various roles.
Yeah, obviously. See, I tell you, obviously, because see, one of the things I think, so one of the things I strongly believe, and I've been practicing, and I'm pretty open to talk about it, is when you're talking about a culture change, who better than the HR folks can do it, right? We're talking about this huge transformation. You're talking about business processes and all of that. You find various ways to do it, but when you really have to touch the humanness in people, when you have to make their psychology really change, I think we are the best. And that's where we are different. And that's precisely why I don't think this profession will ever lose its position, right? So once we start coming out of those templates and start getting into what are people's aspirations and just open up their minds to think about their aspirations, automatically the collaboration happens. No one had to tell them anything. They just volunteered. Of course, with the very strong layers of foundations of trust that happened, I think collaboration is a pretty automatic step that happens. Like if I go back to that example of the Curious Child and coffee, if I had given a whack to my son, like a typical parent at that state of mind would have done, the trust would have been immediately shattered, right? Once the trust is shattered, can I expect that child to help me clean up the spilled coffee? No, obviously not. So if the child could come and help me to scoop up all the coffee powder and to go through all the process of creating a solution out of it and ensuring that it does not have glass pieces in it, I had to build that trust, and just that, the collaboration was an outcome of the trust. Similarly, I think in organizations also, fortunately, I've had the brilliant experience of working in the most difficult industries where this kind of a change can be brought in, like a manufacturing industry, where we actually had to, we were in a situation where we were closing down plants and consolidating them in one large location quite far away. So that involved a huge amount of change management, dealing with 3 unions, dealing with all of that. I mean, that's terrible. But all that it required was to let people know why we are doing this, right? And when that conversation happened very, very openly, and we said that we are not going to just do email communication, we're going to do multiple ways of communication. We are going to have all the decision makers out there on the floor talking to people, listening to them, letting them ask their questions, and answering every single question with authenticity and transparency. So when you get into that, nothing becomes difficult, and then collaboration is automatic. Everybody wants to put their hands together in making the change a huge success. So this has been my journey. I have pretty much been in the transformational role. I don't know whether it is by design or default, but somehow it's been happening. And thankfully enough, I've had the opportunity to work with multiple industries, which are very, very different. And I continue to be in a space which is very different from the previous one. And what it's teaching me is actually nothing is different, right? So sometimes when we talk about getting people from the same industry, it's probably a myth. Nothing is different because everywhere we're dealing with humans. And how do you get a human being get his whole self to the workplace, not wear a mask, is just by trust. Now, if you just look at this small example, is all of us, when do we when do we wear makeup? When we want to look good, right? When we want someone else uh, to feel that we're looking good. What if, I mean, do we ever wear makeup at home or to the person whom we are extremely close? No, because it really doesn't matter to us about what that person thinks about how we look. And that's exactly what happens when it comes to trust. People start wearing masks and layers of masks when they come to the workplace. In the process, they forget to get their entire self to work. And when the entire self doesn't come to the workplace, that's where collaboration never starts. So even if you feel that communication is happening and people are talking and there is information that's getting cascaded, if the feeling of trust does not exist, collaboration is never born. Its collaboration is actually an outcome of trust. So these were the 4 little stories that actually I have experienced in my journey of transformational leadership. Uh, Most of the transformation was attempted as a pilot within my own team because that is my circle of influence. But once it was piloted and it was a very successful pilot, organizations were more than happy to drive it as a cultural transformation. So we are about at 8:40. It's 20 minutes before we close. So Astha, any questions of your choice which you have picked up which you want me to address? Astha, you're on mute. Astha, I see you're on mute.
Yes. Am I audible now?
Yeah, yes, you're back.
Okay. So I was saying that we
Yeah.
received a lot of questions from a lot of people, not only from the HR fraternity, but from other professions as well, who were too much
Yes.
enthusiastic to register for the webinar and listen to you.
That's good.
So some of the questions that I have noted,
Hmm.
one is from
Hmm.
the head HR from NetMeds Chennai,
Hmm.
Mr. Philip.
Hmm.
He wishes to ask you cultural assessment and conflicts
Okay.
that arises during
Okay.
acquiring a mother company. So could you
Hmm.
brief us a bit about
Hmm.
it? Could you help us
Hmm.
understand more on this?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's actually a very, very crucial point which is brought up, and I'm really happy to address this. Uh, when a merger or an acquisition happens, if the culture of both the organizations are not assessed properly, that is, even if you have not felt the culture of the organization, and if we just go ahead with the rest of the procedures of the M&A, it would be a, a collision of cultures, not a coalition, a collision. Okay, it would be a culture clash. So, how does one feel the pulse of the culture of both the organizations? Could be done using surveys if the questions are meaningfully put as to how long do you have discussions with your managers and how is feedback given, and questions like that on a rating scale would give a fair enough idea about how strongly hierarchically driven the organization is, or whether they work on in a kind of a circle without much hierarchy. So a survey like that would help to make an assessment of the culture. And typically, these surveys are done in both the organizations which are coming together if it's a merger, and there is an assessment made as to which is the organizational culture that they would like to have in the new merged organization, and that is then slowly driven down as the various processes and initiatives that they do. Now, if this is not done, I'll also tell you what happens because that's important. If a cultural assessment is not done and it is assumed that uh, the larger of the two organizations or the organization which has acquired the other one, so that's the culture that will be followed, what is most likely to happen is that you might end up losing a lot of people who have been used to a certain culture because they would see a lot of apprehensions in that and they would not be able to figure out where they are heading. Because first of all, let's understand a merger and an acquisition is in a way like matrimony. Okay, so if the person does not understand or is not given a chance to understand what is the expectation of both of them in that new role, and then we all know what happens, right? So a cultural assessment and a measurement is probably the first and the preliminary step before anything else is driven in the M&A. And it should not be done in a hurry, and it's not something which should be done without giving much importance to the outcome. And when I say importance to the outcome, it's obvious that whatever is the outcome needs to be shared with the people in the most appropriate manner. It is not something that a survey is done and the outcome kept aside, but people will definitely want to know how the two organizations are different culturally and what the new organization would look like. So like I said, a measurement, an assessment, and obviously an action plan, which is shown to the people where people can question it. Yeah? Can we have
In
another
fact,
question?
very recently, JBM
Yeah.
also entered a joint venture with a German company with the name
Hmm.
Linde Weimann. So we also did a
Hmm.
lot of workshops, and we also took support from Deloitte for for this integration part, and then
Hmm.
understanding the culture. Because German companies and Indian promoter companies become from different culture and mindset.
Hmm.
So that's how. So
Yes.
then, yes,
Hmm.
that's how we also did some of the exercise on it. Not that much exhaustive as you
Yeah.
are suggesting, but then yes, we did
Yeah.
understand and study a bit about it. We deployed resources in that company in German locations,
Hmm.
and their resources
Hmm.
also keep on coming to us. Uh,
Hmm.
and we do a lot of phone calls and web calls also.
Yeah, but you know something, mergers and acquisitions across geographies, obviously there is cultural difference. But uh, I have been through a core team member for an acquisition of two Indian businesses in the manufacturing space. Now that's very interesting because very Indian, even from the same state. Okay, Mumbai and Pune, if I can say that. Even that acquisition, we have to do a lot of culture test and transformation because every organization is unique in its own way. It goes back to the history of how it started. Okay? If even if it's very local, same state, same district, even then it depends on who started it because the culture actually flows from the person who started the organization. That's where it culture gets set. So even if it's geographically same, it's very unsafe to assume that culturally they'll be similar. Every single organization has a
Yes,
fingerprint, and that's the culture is the fingerprint of the organization. So a fingerprint match needs to
yeah,
be
the core
done in a
values
way.
are different for everyone, and so are the culture. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So culture is actually the fingerprint of every organization. So no two organizations will have absolutely the same kind.
Okay. So should I move to the next one?
Yes, please.
This GMHR with Leap Skills, Delhi-based organization. This is Tarishi. Tarishi says how culture can promote performance in organization.
Of course. So by culture, what we mean is, like I said, that's the fingerprint, right? So in a way, the culture is also the health report of the organization. So if the culture is something, now what do you mean by culture? Culture is a very broad word, okay? So when we talk about culture of an organization, probably one can measure a few of these things. One is what's the level of trust? Now again, I can give you an example. Uh, I'm also associated with one facilities management company where predominantly you have people who are housekeeping staff. It's a medium-sized organization, about 3,000 people strong. Most of them are housekeeping staff in supermarkets. It's a large supermarket chains all over the country in about 25 cities and in premium residences. So they're basically housekeeping staff. Now, what do you think will be the culture of this organization? Right? How do you define? Now, this organization, to my surprise, when I went and I met with about 70, 80 people the last couple of weeks. And what I noticed in this organization that it has an amazing culture. People are hardly educated, right? Uh, they probably do not know anything other than what they're asked to do. They're paid minimum wages and they're taken care of well. That's what it is. But the culture of this organization was like that of a family. I traveled across the country to their various offices and I met with a cross section of people. But no matter who I spoke to, I heard whenever I asked a question about how would you describe this organization? Every one of them had the same answer. And they all said, we don't work here, this is our family. So that's the culture. Now, how does this translate to performance? Okay. If every employee is able to define the culture in a way where he is showing ownership and accountability of the business, obviously the performance will be superb because he thinks he runs the business. He thinks it is his family. So when the culture is something where every single person feels I am managing it. So if the culture is something which has high levels of trust, high levels of self-managed groups, okay, and high levels of extreme stakeholder alignment, which is actually aligning yourself not just to your stakeholder, primary stakeholder, but also beyond that. For example, if I take this facilities management company or housekeeping company, if the stakeholder is, let's say, a big bazaar where their people are deployed, if each of those persons who's cleaning up that space is looking at the customer behavior, the customer of Big Bazaar, the shopper who comes in, if he's looking at that customer behavior and he's trying and doing his work in a way that the customer of Big Bazaar is very happy and delighted with them, obviously that performance is something which is superb. So that's what is called as extreme stakeholder alignment. So the culture of trust, self-management with extreme stakeholder alignment results in performance which is par excellence. Do we have time for another question? I think we do. Asta, another question? You're back on mute. Yeah.
So Deepak Gehlot, head HR from JSG, he wants to understand how to build employee trust in stakeholders.
It's stakeholders. Okay. Building trust has the same secret sauce, the same formula, whether it's a stakeholder or manager or a team member. It's all about the 3 ego states. It's as simple as that. Whenever you are speaking openly and transparently, if you all remember the movie Jab We Met, okay, at that situation where Shahid Kapoor, the hero, he actually addresses the shareholders and he says, "Business ki band baji hai," right? That's called authentic transparency. So the moment you're so open and direct about what's going wrong, okay, and you're committing to how you will correct course, that's when your stakeholders will start developing that trust. The moment you start telling people that you can't talk about what's happening, the moment you start being a little fictitious about stuff, and the moment you start feeling uncomfortable about talking about failures, trust starts depleting. So even if you're not able to deliver to what is expected, if you're able to tell your stakeholder that this is what the problem is, but I know how to get through and work around, that's where trust starts building in. So it's all about being authentic and transparent, even if it's stakeholders, and not covering up. Yeah.
Thank you.
Can we
So
take
in
another
this
question?
webinar, yes, thank you. So in this webinar, you shared success stories of strategies that have worked in building a culture of trust and collaboration. Each of the
Yes.
4 learning outcomes has woven into 4 anecdotes. That is how you helped
Yeah.
us understand it.
Yes.
And you have been a practitioner of the Semco style of leadership, where people are kept at the center of everything, and it's strong foundation of trust that leads
Yes.
to collaboration at work. We also understood that this further leads to better accountability and finally customer delight, basically. And this
Yes.
agile way of working is the need of workplace of the future, of course.
Yep.
So
Yep. So when you're talking of
thank you
agile,
so much.
if there is any live question, Asta, we can take. Otherwise, I will just sum up with what we
Sure.
mean by.
So we have been receiving a lot of questions, and one I would definitely want to take from Prakash Raman. He says how to evaluate the line manager's power from time to time frame because certain managers don't know how to really approach in a subtle way to reach employees.
Yeah, obviously. See, we are talking about human behavior. So let's understand one thing. There will always be people who are not conscious about their own behavior. Obviously, every one of us is. Uh, Now, even if I go back to that example of the curious child and coffee, that day I was in a fantastic frame of mind and I behaved rationally, right? But I'm human. So there could be situations where I must have done a typical parent kind of a thing. So similarly with managers, everybody is human and everybody has been brought up in a way that we automatically take parent or child ego states, right? So it's not possible that everyone is conscious. So why managers are not conscious of this, or why anybody is not conscious, and why people have the fear of approaching a manager is because they automatically push themselves into either of the two ego states, the parent ego state and the child ego state. That's what is automatic. Now, I'm afraid to talk to my manager because I'm defensive. I'm afraid that I might make a mistake. I'm afraid of the consequences. That's because I'm putting myself in a child ego state. But what do you do to change it? Is you have to make people conscious of getting into adult ego states every time. Now, that is one of the underlying philosophies of Agile. Agile talks about, first of all, building an agile muscle, right? So when you, first of all, let's understand that nothing happens overnight, okay? None of these changes can happen overnight. So we can't expect people to change and start behaving, demonstrating adult to adult behavior. So when you start, when you want to demonstrate, the adult behavior, you start, first of all, you have to start building an agile muscle. Now, what is an agile muscle is allowing people to focus more on the outcome and not on the people. So start coaching managers to focus on the outcome and not on the people and on the task. So that's how they start, and when once managers start focusing on the outcome, they start focusing on their responsibilities towards the outcome. Because the moment the focus shifts on the people, the blame game and all of that starts. So when managers start showing more responsible behavior, that's when the agile muscle starts building. Once the agile muscle starts building, you have to patiently let things fall in place. So never go for a big bang, but you'll have to start building the agile muscle as a culture. And that's what it's all about. It's about going slowly, bit by bit, taking a person by person, putting them through coaching, hand holding them through how to make this change, and so on and so forth.
There's one more question from Mohana. Mohana would want to ask, how do HRs create a collaborating working space for the employees and keep the team highly motivated during recession? Are there any insights on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of my favorite success stories. I'll quickly talk about this. We're out of time already. So HR's role in recession is a key role. Okay, HR is the one which manages the mood in the organization. So during time of recession, the more transparent HR is about what's going on behind the scenes, the more trust people start putting on the HR function, right? So if an organization has to downsize its people during recession, which is what typically happened, I think HR's role is there to get into that process completely under control. If downsizing is one of the severe steps that is taken, and it has a very long lasting effect, which can even be very negative in the people's minds, because one person is terminated, it leaves a very bad taste in everyone's mouth. And HR's role there is very critical.
On the employer brand also.
Yes, and HR's role there is very critical. HR has to take this entire process in their hands. HR has to drive every single conversation, telling the person why he's being asked to go. No HR's answer that you're being asked to go because your manager said so. That won't work. We all know about the audio clip that went viral on how that happened in one organization. But HR's role typically would be to talk through that employee along with the managers, explain to them, and also assure them that, we will give our names as your reference when you're applying for a job elsewhere, and we will help you to find a job. Even that is good enough to keep trust in that individual, to keep that person going. So the role of HR in times of turbulence, in terms of recession, is to take the entire responsibility of people and their morale into its hands. So that's the role of the HR function. So we are just over
If
the
we
hour.
have time, I would like to take one more.
Yes, we can take one more question.
Is there possibility? Okay, so Meenakshi Yadav, she wants to understand, can developing ownership within the groups?
Can you just repeat the question, Asta?
Sure. Meenakshi Yadav, she wants to understand highlight on ownership within the groups.
I still didn't get the question. I got the name of the person who's asking the question. So can you probably type it out?
On developing, developing ownership in groups. Developing ownership in groups.
Okay. Developing ownership in groups. Okay. So what can be done to develop ownership in groups, right? Yeah. So to develop ownership in groups, I think the first and foremost thing is to remove any kind of fear of consequence or fear of failure. I will not own up to do something as long as I feel that I might be punished for the outcome. Everyone normally is afraid of failure. So if you want somebody to take ownership of things, you have to let that person be in his space. Let that person do the way he would want to do. But at the same time, if you feel that that person probably may not have the capability, just watch over. So like the Chinese proverb goes, a teacher appears when the student does not know anything and disappears when the student knows everything, right? So in that way, you build ownership by giving, not dumping work, actually delegating. So when you're delegating work, you give the task to somebody, giving a broader picture, the bigger picture. Let that person operate in his space with comfort so that he doesn't have the fear of failure, and go and do a monitoring and let that person speak about his successes and failures. So the moment that personal space is there and the person does not, and you overcome that fear of consequence and the fear of failure and the fear of being questioned, I think responsibility automatically comes.
Sure, ma'am. With this, I think we come to the end of the webinar. It's been such a fruitful and insightful webinar for us, and I would like to thank you for providing time. One, I would also like to thank audience for registering and being active all the time and sending your queries so that we could improvise on the subjects that we would want to share during the webinar. I would like to thank Anu, Kashish, Jyoti, Kriti, Bhanu, Veer, and many more people who support us behind the scenes. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone in the Core HRIR team, and thanks Asta and Veer for actually getting hold of me every time for whatever we had to do behind the scenes. And I apologize if there has been any delay from my end in responding. And it's always a pleasure for me to interact with people in the fraternity. There's always a lot of learning for me because there are lots of seniors in this group from whose messages I keep reading and watching. So every one of you, thanks a lot for being there, for joining us, and please do stay in touch. You can always find me on LinkedIn or just trace out my phone number, and I'm always available. So happy to share learnings, happy to learn from everyone. Thanks a lot, everyone, and enjoy your weekend.
Thank you so much, and happy weekend to everyone.
Thanks. Bye.